that was terrifying and inspirational at the same time, these videos. Okay, so let's talk about quantum. I've heard kind of two sides actually in the last 2 days. Yesterday, somebody mentioned that quantum is a science experiment. And then earlier this morning, the general said that cybersecurity is one of the main priorities when it comes to geopolitics. So how does quantum come into that? That's what we're going to be talking about today. My name is Stephanie Kemp. I'm part of our KPMG's Enterprise Innovation team. I primarily focus on looking at signals and the trends of the market to really understand what the change will be, what the future of KPMG is going to be like for ourselves and for our clients. So let's talk about quantum. It's one of the most exciting and transformative areas in modern science. It promises to revolutionize industries and solve problems that previously we didn't think was possible. And it will truly transform the way we think about computing. And with me today, I've got my two friends and one of the most brilliant minds that I know within quantum. So I'll start with you, Richard. Richard is a director at IBM's global quantum ecosystem. And as you guys know, IBM is really at the forefront of research and commercializing quantum use cases in the market. And I've known him for about a year because of the relationship, the network that we joined this past summer. And then Aaron Kemp, he is actually the US lead for quantum at KPMG and is a personal friend, but there's so much more to him than that. He is an ex-Marine, ex-Navy helicopter pilot, ex-Lockheed classified cybersecurity expert, and holds a doctorate in post-quantum security. So, that's just a little bit about the two folks here today. So, guys, let's start by talking about the basics. I think a lot of people often want to know and ask, what is quantum? And why do we think about quantum in a different way than the way we think about just regular computers, classical computers, as we say? So let's start with you, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think quantum for me, I know there are some naysayers, and it's perpetually been 30 years, or 5 years away for 30 years. So we are kind of this interesting technology out on the edge, but quantum's a new paradigm in how we compute and what we're able to do. It is not going to be a replacement for classical systems by any means, but it is going to augment and solve problems that classical systems will not be able to. It's going to be in its own place within the compute environment. It's going to sit in a position where it works on parts that we can't do in classical, we can't do with AI, and it's going to fill in some of those gaps so we can really progress how we learn and what we're able to do with computing systems.
Yeah. How about you, Richard?
Yeah, I think that's a great response, Aaron. This is one of the questions that makes us sweat a little bit because quantum is odd and it has some very strange behaviors. But if you think about classical computing for a moment and you think about a single bit can only be a 1 or a 0. But with quantum bits or qubits, we can actually represent our qubits as a combination of both. And this is really exciting because what it means is that as we add more and more qubits to our processor, the amount of information we can store grows exponentially. And so, if you get to 50, 60, 70, 100 qubits, that's a very large number. And that amount of memory, that amount of information exceeds the memory capacity of some of the largest supercomputers in the world. So that's really exciting, but where it gets really interesting is that because of the properties of quantum mechanics, the information that we've stored in our qubits, we can actually interfere that information. And we can also use a property called entanglement, which means that if I measure this qubit to be a 0, then I know exactly the result of this other qubit without even having to measure it. And so these very strange, peculiar properties could help us solve some of the most complex problems, either known or unknown. We have this new tool, so this new way of thinking might actually help us solve problems that we've not even considered yet. It's a great question.
And it's a complicated one.
It's a complicated one. I'd say, another thing is, it is important to understand that quantum computers, they're not going to replace classical computers. So it's important to recognize that we have this new tool, and so what can we do with it?
Yeah. So to that note, can you tell us about some of the breakthroughs in the past couple years? I do feel like we've been hearing about quantum quite often, a lot more than I used to before. So why is that? And then, in your opinion, based on what you're looking at, what are some of the predictions of the next couple years, what we should be looking out for, and some of the trends to see?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question again. So I think we can link this question to Salim's presentation on exponential technologies. So the ideas for quantum computing have been around for many, many decades, but we are at a point today where we have built real systems. So IBM was one of the first organizations to put quantum computers on the cloud. And what this meant was we could get quantum computing in the hands of as many different people as possible. And I think that's going to accelerate our understanding and our progress, and help us to help us identify problems that we can solve with this new capability. So this is no longer a science experiment. This is really, it's a real thing. This image on the left-hand side here is one of our systems that's located in the Cleveland Clinic. It's located in a cafeteria in the Cleveland Clinic. This is a real operating system. And so the clinicians at the Cleveland Clinic, the domain experts, are working with data scientists, quantum information scientists, and asking really challenging questions about how do we improve patient healthcare? How do we design new drugs? So there's some really, really exciting opportunities on the horizon.
Mm-hmm. So, Aaron, let's make this real for everybody here. Can you talk a little bit about what the applications are, what businesses should be thinking about? Why is this interesting? Why do we have different use cases? And we actually popped up a couple examples of the sectors, and you saw that in the video as well. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's been movement across everything. I think one of the important parts of quantum is we are now in the utility era. They're no longer just experimental. We've hit a stage where we can actually perform applications, do research, and get actionable data out the back end. There's been work done on battery optimization for EVs. There's work going on cancer research, which is incredibly important. We're researching portfolio optimization and how do we make those better and faster, fraud detection, working with clients on logistics of how do we move needed supplies into an area after a hurricane, what's the best methodology, and how do we optimize that to make sure we're getting to the best places. So it's a very broad application of the system where those kind of problems are uniquely suited to quantum, and it goes across all industries.
Yeah, and you might have to talk about this too, but I like the way you frame it as good quantum and bad quantum, because I think it helps people to understand that not all quantum is created equal, and certain things, whether it's bad or good, it could help or be a detriment, is actually how we can also think about business use cases.
Yeah, very much. The good quantum, bad quantum came from a joke of how do we explain there's actionable things organizations need to do because of quantum, which is the post-quantum cryptography migration that everybody's going to get to go through soon. And then the optimization part of it, where organizations can actually make gains, find better methods to do things, and save money that they can then apply to that post-quantum cryptography migration.
What does that mean exactly? And by the way, I mentioned he has a doctorate in this very field.
Yes. So the post-quantum cryptography migration, Peter Shor came up with an algorithm at AT&T back in 1994 that shortcuts much of the cryptography we use to protect our communications. So back in 2017, NIST started a competition to build new quantum-resistant algorithms so that we would have replacements for this, but it is going to be the largest cryptographic migration we've ever done in history. And it's something organizations are going to have to go through. Legacy equipment, legacy applications, all of these are going to have to be discovered. We're going to have quantum risk assessments, and then organizations will have to decide how they're going to get to that post-quantum state where they're protected.
Yeah, which is the very reason why I mentioned cybersecurity up front. There's huge implication to that industry. So when it comes to business, Richard, one of the things that I think we heard yesterday as well is return on investment. especially when we're looking at emerging technologies and areas of unknown. So within quantum, we talk a little bit about the risks of now, but then the future potential. How do we want to think about, for the business, how do we measure the return on investment? And is that something that we're doing right now?
Absolutely. So again, I would draw inspiration from Salim's presentation, and when we're working with these new tools and technologies, it's embarrassing.
Is that you?
How can a panelist not turn off their phone?
I was like, oh, lovely music.
Can we edit that out? Yeah. So back to the topic. So I think in Salim's presentation, he talked about how we can't always use the traditional measures of
Yes.
success. So, for the next few years, it's going to be difficult to tie any developments in quantum computing to, revenues or increasing market share. But obviously, as we identify use cases and we find the right ones for the organization, as the technology evolves and improves, then we'll be able to start, I think, to bring in more traditional metrics and ROIs on, what is the possible revenue opportunities, what's the possible market share that we can gain from using this new tool. So yeah, I think that's. I don't know if you have any additional views on that.
I think the edge case that was presented was a good one. I think we've talked with a lot of clients, and a very hard question in quantum is what makes a good quantum problem. We spend a lot of time with limited qubits to try and answer questions that are very complicated. And things like AI and high power compute provide kind of the front end to reduce data sets to actionable algorithms. But that research is going to take time, and organizations need to be able to feel out their optimization areas and what works for them and where they can find places to get gains using quantum. And I think as we move from quantum utility to where we've actually got actual scale quantum computers and we can get those ROIs, if you're just starting that process, that point, you're behind. The work is beginning now. It's figuring out those things so that you've built the application scalable. So when the quantum catches up and we've got those qubits, we're ready to go and the organization can act on that.
Yeah, I think what I'm also hearing is that, I think you mentioned too, quantum is not going to be replacing the classical computers, but there are going to be use cases that are much more beneficial and effective.
Yeah.
So I think that's important for people to keep in mind. So we talked about AI quite a bit for the past 2 days, and it's an important topic. But I also hear about quantum and AI together sometimes, and either one could accelerate the other. Can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, happy to take that one. So we actually use AI in improving our algorithms, and actually the way that we take classical problems and map them to a quantum computer. We actually use AI to assist us in that process. So there is a symbiosis there where we can actually use AI to improve the performance of quantum. And then obviously there's an open question about whether we can use quantum to enhance AI and assist in training models using quantum. So we're also playing around with large language models. So we can use code assist to help us program quantum computers. Important thing to note there is that we started this panel talking about the peculiarities of quantum computing, but today the programming languages extract away a lot of that complexity. So we are using programming languages that data scientists are probably very familiar with. And so, even people without a programming background, we're looking at how can we use large language models to assist those that don't have that background to access the technology as well.
Yeah, I see very exciting faces. Hey, so I have 2 questions really, and that's really the time that we have. One is around ecosystem. So within our group in innovation, we focus a lot on accelerating our progress through partnerships, whether it's an alliance partner, startups, universities, we've heard it all. How do we think about moving forward and making progress in a new area, in a disruptive area like quantum through the ecosystem, both from government funding, commercial side? How do you guys feel about that?
I think that's one where we're seeing organizations and governments and research universities come together, things like Elevate Quantum, who we spoke with this week and who was here, the Chicago Quantum Exchange, investments by states. I know Illinois has committed $500 million to quantum and is going to build a quantum research center. Chicago.
You're the only brave one.
But I think the ecosystem right now, because of the complexity and the opportunity, is really driving that collaborative approach to it. There's some good stuff from IBM on the data center of the future, showing your high-power compute sitting next to an LLM, sitting next to a quantum computer, all in one place because they each fill their niche role. And it's that collaborative effort with research, universities, and then governments putting the money behind it that's really going to push us forward on this and keep the momentum going to where we get really where we want to be and we can solve those big problems.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, one thing that I hadn't really thought about when we have these partnership models, there's also a regional component to it as well. I don't know if you mentioned Colorado,
Yep.
but regionally, they're investing a lot of money through universities and other companies, and they're trying to build these hubs for specific areas of technologies. So I get really excited about that. And semiconductor, Arizona, I think there's definitely, centralized investments, and I think we need to follow those. So last question. So we're gonna wrap up, and I'd like to ask each of you, what is the one key takeaway you want everybody here to walk away with when it comes to quantum? Let's start with you.
So for me, it's, if you've been following our roadmap or any of the roadmaps, and if the goal is to wait for a fault-tolerant quantum computer, I would say at that point it will be too late, because organizations are exploring the potential of quantum computing today. So they're identifying use cases, they're upskilling the workforce, and so by the time we do have fault-tolerant quantum computers, they're going to be ahead. So my recommendation is start now. Let's start having the conversation. Let's start identifying opportunities and don't wait.
I'm going to piggyback off of that with the don't wait on the risk side of, I know NIST hasn't put out the new standards yet, but post-quantum cryptography is coming and there's a lot of pre-work that you can do. And I'm also going to end with the workforce of, we were up with the Chicago Quantum Exchange in Polsky and got some neat examples of law firms now hiring physicists coming out of college to ensure they're ready to handle the IP coming off quantum. And the estimate is we will be 50% short of a quantum workforce by next year. So we've got to figure out the training. We've got to figure out how to get kids interested in this and really shore up what's going to be a transformative technology as we move down the road.
All right, well, thank you so much, guys. That was enlightening and very interesting. So I hope you guys think more about quantum tomorrow.
Thank you.